I was 34 years old the afternoon I stood in a hospital atrium, holding my daughter's hand, while a reporter's phone buzzed with 3 words that ended my stepmother's charity in front of 300 people, and I hadn't said a single one of them myself. But this story really starts 2 years before that afternoon, the night my daughter's heart stopped for 11 seconds on an operating table 40 miles from here. My name is Willa Sinclair. I'm 34, and I spend my working life making sure charities in this state actually spend what they raise on what they promise donors, which meant I knew precisely what to look for when it started happening to my own daughter. My stepmother raised $96,000 off my 7-year-old's heart surgery. My daughter got a get well card. Sharon announced the total the way you'd read out a weather report, pleased with herself, like it was simply a fact of the day. Nothing more remarkable than rain. I didn't call her out. Not at the gala. Not after. But here's what Sharon didn't know. I hadn't just noticed the numbers. I'd already filed the exact same complaint any stranger off the street could file, through the state's ordinary public channels, no special access, nothing that traced back to my job at all. And then I did the one thing she never once expected. Nothing else. 6 weeks later, a woman I'd never met would open a public database on her lunch break and find precisely what I'd left there. And on the afternoon Sharon Pruitt cut the ribbon on a hospital wing with my daughter's name carved into the wall, a reporter's phone would buzz mid-sentence with the words that undid the entire ceremony. Nobody in that atrium saw it coming from quiet, cooperative Willa, the one everyone assumed was simply grateful to be included. The one who'd signed every form she was ever handed without complaint. The one who brought a fruit tray to every gala and never once asked for the microphone. Welcome back to Calm Stories, where the ones who kept the peace for everyone else finally tell you the whole thing, calmly, start to finish. If a quiet kind of justice is your thing, settle in, drop a comment, and tell me where you're listening from. And hit subscribe so you don't miss how this one ends. Let me back up. Maisie was 5 when the cardiologist first said the words tetralogy of Fallot, 4 syllables that quietly rearranged every plan I had for the next several years of my life. She was 7, small for her age, obsessed with a stuffed heart-shaped pillow the CQ nurses handed out for kids to hug against their chest after surgery, the year she finally had the full repair done at Thorndale Regional. A CQ nurse named Marisol Tan was the one who actually handed it to her, still groggy, tubes taped along one small arm, and said, "Here, sweetheart, hug this when it hurts to cough, okay? He's tough, he can take it." Maisie named the pillow Beau before she was even fully out of recovery, because it looked like a bow, and Beau went everywhere after that. School, the car, eventually into every single photograph anyone took of her for the following year. Marisol checked on us twice more that week than her rotation technically required, brought me a second pillow of my own once, for the vinyl recliner, without being asked. I never forgot that. Some kindness in a hospital is procedure, some of it isn't, and you can always tell the difference if you're paying attention. My stepmother, Sharon Pruitt, ran an event planning company called Pruitt Occasions. And when Maisie went in for surgery, Sharon showed up at the hospital with a folder of fundraiser ideas before I'd even finished signing the consent forms. "A gala," she said, "to help with the bills." I was exhausted and frightened and grateful for anything that felt even a little like help, so when she asked me to sign a basic release letting the foundation use Maisie's name and photos, I signed it in a hallway chair without reading past the first paragraph, the way you sign anything when your whole body is still listening for a heart monitor down the hall. Sharon had it ready on a clipboard before I'd even asked what it said, a pen already uncapped and held out toward me. I didn't ask who owned the foundation, who sat on its board, or where exactly the money would go once it came in. I signed my daughter's name and photograph over to a woman I'd known for 11 years and trusted mostly out of habit, and I didn't think about that piece of paper again for almost 2 years. My father, Roger, has been married to Sharon for 11 years now. He is a good man in every way that doesn't require confrontation, and a quiet one in every way that does. What was actually at risk that first year wasn't only money. It was the difference between people helping my daughter and people using her, and for a long time I genuinely couldn't tell which one I was watching happen in front of me. The first gala raised $40,000 in a single evening at the Thorndale Country Club, a silent auction, a slideshow of Maisie in her hospital gown that made half the room cry. Sharon, in a dress, the exact shade of the Mighty Heart logo she'd had designed that same week. She called it Maisie's Mighty Heart Foundation before I'd even picked out a font for the thank you cards. I stood near the back that night, in the dress I'd bought the week of my own daughter's surgery, and watched my stepmother thank a room full of strangers for their generosity toward a child she otherwise saw maybe 4 times a year. My father stood beside Sharon at the front, applauding at all the right moments, and caught my eye once across the room with an expression I couldn't quite name yet, something between pride and apology that he didn't have words for and I didn't ask him to find. I told myself it didn't matter who got the applause, as long as the money actually helped. I believed that, genuinely, that whole first year. By the second gala, the foundation had a logo, a tagline, and a line item on the printed program labeled Event Production Services, Pruitt Occasions, that I only noticed because I happened to glance at a copy someone had left on a folding chair. The ballroom that year was done up in the same soft blue as the logo, votive candles down the center of every table, a raffle for a weekend cabin somebody had donated. Sharon stood at the microphone in heels I recognized as new, thanked the room for its generosity, and never once mentioned that the company handling the flowers, the linens, the raffle printing, and the photographer was the same company whose name was on her own business cards. She never mentioned a dollar figure at those evenings without also mentioning, somewhere in the same toast, whose vision had made it all possible. Hers, always, unmistakably, first. None of this happens without someone willing to actually do the work, she told the room that night, raising her glass slightly, and I watched 200 strangers nod along and reach for their wallets a second time before dessert. Devon, Sharon's daughter from her first marriage, worked the check-in table at every single event, a folding table by the entrance, a cash box, a stack of name tags in her mother's chosen font, a badge that said Foundation Staff, a role that came, I'd learn much later, with its own stipend. She was 26, pleasant to me in the hallway kind of way stepfamily often manages, and she never once looked entirely comfortable holding that clipboard. I didn't understand why yet. Grace Odom, the hospital's actual foundation relations officer, was the one who'd originally floated the idea of a formal partnership to Sharon, back when the first gala did well enough to get the hospital's attention. Grace did everything by the book: memos, disclosure forms, a standard donor agreement that any outside organization partnering with Thorndale Regional had to sign. I met her once, briefly, at the second gala, and she struck me as exactly the kind of careful, unglamorous person who makes institutions actually trustworthy. I remember thinking, that night, that the hospital's side of this was clearly in good hands. I didn't yet understand that good process on one end of a partnership doesn't stop someone determined on the other end from routing money around it. Work has a way of handing your own life back to you sideways when you least expect it. A few months later, I reviewed a case file for an unrelated nonprofit, a family foundation where the founder's own brother-in-law ran the preferred event vendor, billed at nearly double the market rate, paid straight out of restricted donor funds, nobody outside the family ever audited closely. Nothing dramatic on paper. Just quiet and steady and completely unaccountable to anyone who wasn't specifically looking for it. I drove home that evening without the radio on. I didn't want to think the thought I was already thinking, so I simply didn't, not yet, not out loud, not even to myself alone in the car. I asked Sharon one question, gently, at a family dinner, the kind of question I'd ask any client if I were asking it professionally instead of personally. Could I see a basic breakdown of where the foundation money's actually going, just for my own peace of mind, as Maisie's mom. She smiled the smile she used for photographs. That's not really your department, is it, Willa? You audit other people's charities for a living. This one's family. I'm not asking as an auditor, I said. I'm asking as Maisie's mother. You're asking like both, whether you mean to or not. She said it lightly, almost kindly, the way you'd correct a child's grammar. I promise you it's all accounted for. You'll see it in the annual report, same as everyone else. My father looked down at his plate. Nobody else at the table said a single word. I called my father the next morning, hoping, I think, that he'd say something that made the dinner feel smaller than it had. He didn't. You know how she gets when she feels criticized, he said, which wasn't a defense of her, so much as a request that I stop making him choose. Just let her have this one, Willa. It's good for Maisie, isn't it? The attention, the wing someday, all of it. I told him I wasn't sure yet what it was good for. He changed the subject to the weather, the way he changed the subject to almost anything once a conversation got within reach of an actual disagreement. I loved my father. I also understood, hanging up that call, that he was never once going to be the person who asked Sharon the hard question on my behalf, or on Maisie's. That was never going to be his role in this family, and some part of me had known that for years without saying it out loud. I didn't ask Sharon again that night. I went home and sat in my car in my own driveway for 11 minutes before I went inside, doing arithmetic I didn't yet have real numbers for, only a feeling I recognized professionally, and very much did not want to recognize personally. What I did next, I did exactly the way I'd tell any stranger to do it. I looked up the foundation's charitable registration on the state's public database, the same records any citizen can pull up from a laptop at their own kitchen table. Nothing that required my badge or my login or my job title at all. Pruitt Occasions, I found, had been listed as the foundation's primary paid vendor for 3 consecutive years, invoiced at rates roughly double what comparable event companies charged for similar galas anywhere else in the state. Sharon sat on the foundation's own 3-person board. She had, in effect, been approving payments to herself, year after year, in plain sight of anyone who thought to look. I sat at my kitchen table with that database open for nearly 2 hours, cross-checking dates against gala photos I still had saved on my phone, against thank you emails Sharon had sent the whole family, building nothing on paper that I intended to hand to anyone, just building it, quietly, in my own understanding, the way I'd want any citizen to be thorough before they trusted their own read on a public record. It wasn't dramatic. It was closer to grief than anger, actually, sitting there. I kept thinking about the folder she'd brought to the hospital before I'd even finished signing consent forms, and how much I'd wanted, that day, for it to simply mean what it looked like it meant. I told Grant before I told anyone else, over coffee at pickup one afternoon, the 2 of us leaning against his truck, while Maisie finished a math worksheet in the back seat. He listened the whole way through without interrupting, which is a thing I'd always appreciated about him, even when we were married, and it wasn't enough to keep us that way. So what do you actually want to do about it? He finally asked. Not, what are you going to do? Which I noticed and was grateful for. I told him I wasn't sure yet, only that I couldn't keep pretending I hadn't seen it. Then don't pretend, he said. But don't turn yourself into the story either. Let the facts be the story. It was, I think, the most useful sentence anyone said to me that whole year, and I carried it with me into every decision I made after. I formally recused myself from my own office's charitable oversight division that same week, a short email, on the record, stating plainly that a family relationship made it inappropriate for me to have any professional involvement in a review of this organization, ever, in any capacity, present or future. Then, that same evening, from my own home computer, using the identical public complaint form available to absolutely anyone, I filed exactly what I'd found. Dates, dollar figures, the board's composition, nothing I hadn't verified publicly, nothing that came from my job. And then I did nothing else. I didn't warn Sharon. I didn't tell my father. I didn't check the file's status even once. I went back to my actual life and let a process I'd deliberately kept myself entirely outside of run on its own clock, at its own pace. I saw Sharon at a 4th of July barbecue a few weeks after I filed, and she hugged me the way she always did, one arm, quick, more gesture than contact, and told me the foundation had just crossed a new fundraising milestone she was thrilled about. I said congratulations, and meant absolutely nothing by it except the word itself. It is a strange, specific kind of discipline, smiling at someone across a paper plate of potato salad while a complaint with their name on it sits somewhere in a state office, moving at whatever pace state offices move at, and saying nothing at all to speed it along or slow it down. A girl in Maisie's class had seen a local news segment about the upcoming wing dedication and asked her, at recess, what it felt like to be famous. Maisie didn't know what to say, so she said nothing and came home quieter than usual, and it was 2 days later, buckled into her booster seat, apropos of nothing, that she finally asked me the question 7-year-olds ask when something's been sitting in them longer than a parent realizes. Mommy, why does Grandma Sharon get to talk about my heart on the news, and we don't? I didn't answer right away. I just gripped the wheel a little tighter at a red light, and felt something settle flat and still in my chest. Not new information, exactly. Just a fact I'd been circling for months finally landing. The way you know a bruise is already there before you've even looked down at your own arm. That's a really good question, baby, I finally said. I'm working on it. I didn't cry that night. I didn't call anyone to vent about any of it. Not Grant, not a friend, nobody. Something had simply gone quiet and settled in me on the rest of that drive. The particular quiet that isn't calm so much as a decision arriving without asking permission first. I wasn't going to spend one more year deciding whether I was overreacting. I already knew I wasn't. When we got home, I took Bo down from the shelf in the front hallway, where he'd sat for almost a year now as a prop in exactly 4 different foundation photographs, and I carried him back upstairs and put him on Maisie's actual bed, where he'd always belonged in the first place. She didn't ask me why. She just hugged him tight and went back to her show. My supervisor, Oliver, stood up at an all-staff meeting that spring and praised our division's recusal policy by name, calling it the reason people actually trust this office. Completely unaware he was describing, almost word for word, the email I'd sent myself months earlier about my own family. I sat in the 3rd row and said nothing, the way I'd gotten fairly practiced at saying nothing that year, and clapped along with everyone else when he finished. The wing dedication was announced 5 months after that. Sharon had secured naming rights on the hospital's new pediatric cardiac recovery wing through a $200,000 foundation donation, and Thorndale Regional planned a full ribbon-cutting ceremony. Press, hospital leadership, a plaque with Maisie's name, and a photo Sharon had chosen without asking either of us first. A reporter named Nadia Whitlock, new to the local desk and still building her list of sources, was assigned the human interest angle. Local step-grandmother turns family tragedy into a children's cardiac wing. Sharon called her twice before the interview to make sure she had the emotional arc right, a phrase I heard secondhand from Devon and didn't think much of at the time. Nadia, for her part, seemed like exactly the kind of reporter who'd take that kind of coaching as a reason to check harder, not less. The sort of instinct that doesn't announce itself until it matters. Stay with me. The part where a state registry says something Sharon never expected is coming. So hit subscribe now, and let's get to that ribbon together. I'd noticed Devon pulling away from the check-in table a little more each event that year, arriving later, leaving before the toasts, once texting me directly to ask, out of nowhere, whether Maisie was doing okay in school, a question that had nothing to do with anything on her actual clipboard. I didn't read much into it at the time. I had my own quiet process running, and I wasn't looking for allies inside a family I was still, technically, only watching. Devon called me the week before the dedication, her voice smaller than I'd ever once heard it. Willa, I need to tell you something, but I don't know how to start. I told her she could tell me anything at all. She went quiet for a long moment and then said only, I get a percentage of every event. I've gotten it for 3 years now. I didn't know how to say no the first time, and I don't know how to stop now. I thanked her for telling me. I didn't tell her what I already knew or what I'd already done months earlier. I only said, whatever happens next, none of this is your fault to fix alone. The morning of the dedication, I dressed Maisie in the blue dress she'd worn to her 1-year checkup, packed Bo in her backpack because she asked me to, and drove to Thorndale Regional with Grant, who still shows up for things like this, even though we've been divorced 3 years now, because that's simply who he's always been as her father. I hadn't checked the complaint status once since the night I filed it. I genuinely didn't know, walking into that atrium, whether anything had come of it at all. If any of this is hitting close to home for you, drop a comment and let's finish this one together. The ribbon cutting is next, and it does not end the way Sharon planned it. 300 people filled the hospital atrium under a banner that read, Maisie's Mighty Heart Wing, a string quartet playing something soft near the elevator bank, the smell of hospital coffee and fresh paint still hanging faintly in the air behind the flowers. Dr. Okafor, the cardiologist who'd repaired Maisie's heart 2 years earlier, stood near the front in his white coat, there in an official capacity, nodding politely along with the program the way doctors do at events they're required to attend but didn't organize. Sharon stood at a podium in a suit the exact color of the foundation's logo, thanked everyone who believed in a grandmother's love enough to let her carry this, and gestured toward Maisie without quite meeting her eyes. I stood near the front with Maisie's hand in mine, Bo tucked under her other arm, not planning to say a single word. I hadn't come to accuse anyone of anything. I'd changed nothing about my own conduct in 2 full years, and I wasn't about to start that morning, in that atrium, in front of everyone, including the one doctor in the room who actually knew my daughter's heart better than any of us. Nadia Whitlock stood a few feet away with her phone in hand, doing what any careful reporter does before running a feel-good piece. A last check of the charity's registration status, standard practice, 5 minutes before her deadline. I watched her expression change before I understood exactly why. Her phone had buzzed with an automated alert from the state's public charity registry, a compliance notice, posted that exact hour, flagging Maisie's Mighty Heart Foundation for undisclosed related party vendor payments. She didn't whisper it. She asked it plainly, professionally, the way reporters are trained to, stepping just close enough to the podium to be heard by the first few rows. Ms. Pruitt, can you comment on the compliance notice the state posted about the foundation, about 20 minutes ago? A ripple moved through the front rows before most of the room even understood why. The particular hush of people who've caught a shift in tone before they've caught the reason for it, phones starting to lower, a few heads turning toward each other instead of the podium. The quartet kept playing for a few more bars before someone finally signaled them to stop. Sharon's smile didn't drop so much as freeze in place, the particular stillness of someone doing math in front of an audience that's already watching her do it. That must be some kind of error I'd need to look into. The notice cites Pruitt occasions as the vendor, Nadia said, still gentle, still simply doing her job. 3 years of invoices at close to double the standard rate, approved by a board you personally sit on. Nobody had told Nadia to check that morning. Nobody had warned her I'd filed anything, months earlier, from my own kitchen table on an ordinary weeknight. She had simply done what any competent reporter does before a deadline, and the state's own clock had happened to strike at the exact hour of the ribbon. I didn't say a word. I felt Maisie's hand tighten slightly in mine, and I looked down and smiled at her instead, the way you do when the whole room is about to change, and your 7-year-old doesn't need to understand why yet. Beside the stage, Devon had gone very pale and very still, and I watched her make a decision in real time. She stepped toward the podium, toward her own mother, and said, quietly enough that only the front rows caught it, "Mom, just tell them the truth." Dr. Okafor, beside me, murmured something I only half caught. Well, was most of it, and didn't say anything else, though his eyebrows did the rest of the sentence for him. Maisie tugged my hand and asked, in the too loud whisper only kids manage, "Is the party over?" I told her it was almost over, and that she'd done absolutely nothing wrong today, which was the truest thing I said in that whole atrium. Nadia's full story ran 4 days later, not the puff piece anyone had originally assigned her, but a careful, sourced piece that quoted the state's notice directly, and never once quoted me, because I never gave her a single word to quote. She called me once, afterward, off the record, just to ask if I was doing okay. I told her I was, and thanked her for checking her facts instead of just running the easy version. "That's just the job," she said, which is exactly what Marisol said about a pillow, exactly what Grace said about a suspended agreement, exactly what most of the actual honest people in this story said about doing the ordinary decent thing that happened to matter enormously. Here's where everyone ended up. Grace Odom, to her credit, moved fast. The hospital suspended the foundation's naming agreement within a week, pending the outcome of the state's review, and personally called me to say she was sorry it had taken a reporter's phone buzzing at the worst possible moment for anyone to catch what her own office's paperwork hadn't. I told her that wasn't her failure to carry. The foundation's board, the 2 members who weren't Sharon, brought in an independent administrator within the month, at the hospital's own insistence, and the state opened a formal compliance review that's still ongoing as I tell you this. Sharon stepped back from day-to-day control, not by choice. The state's preliminary findings, released a few months later, confirmed what the public database had already shown anyone willing to look. 3 years of vendor payments to Pruitt occasions, at roughly double market rate, approved by a board she sat on, with no disclosed conflict of interest on file anywhere. She's facing fines and a multi-year ban from serving on any registered charities board in this state, though the final number wasn't settled as of the last update I got. She's cooperating, mostly, according to my father, who tells me these things now in a way he never used to before. Devon returned every dollar of her stipend that she could account for, just over $11,000, paid back in 3 installments she insisted on setting up herself, and sat with me in my kitchen, twice, to apologize properly, not performatively, no audience, no cameras, just Devon, quiet, saying she'd known for a long time, and simply hadn't known how to be the one to say it first. I kept telling myself it wasn't really stealing if it was technically legal, she told me the second time, turning a mug of coffee in slow circles on my kitchen table. It was still stealing, I just had a good enough job title not to have to call it that. She helps now, actually helps, dropping off groceries during Maisie's follow-up appointment weeks, no foundation logo anywhere near any of it. No clipboard, no badge. I didn't ask for a single dollar back for myself, or for Maisie. I asked the hospital instead to redirect whatever gets recovered straight into the Cardiac Families Assistance Fund the wing was always supposed to serve in the first place, the actual thing, not the photograph of the thing. Maisie asked me about it once more, that same night, in the bath. In the specific, unhurried way kids ask their real questions when the water's warm and nobody's rushing them to bed. Was Grandma Sharon in trouble today? I told her the truth in pieces she could actually hold, that some grown-up money rules had gotten broken, that it wasn't anything Maisie had done, and that grown-ups sometimes make things about themselves that were never supposed to be about them at all. She thought about that for a while, working shampoo through Beau's slightly damp ear where he'd fallen in the tub earlier, and said, "That's kind of what happened with my show and tell heart poster too, at school. Bailey wanted it to be about her. I told her that was exactly what happened, and that she'd handled it better at 7 than plenty of adults managed to." My father told me something a few weeks later that I hadn't known before. Decades ago, before he ever met my mother, Sharon lost a pregnancy in her 2nd trimester. Quietly, alone, in a marriage that didn't survive it. She never had the village everyone gathers around a sick child, the way our family had gathered around Maisie, he said. and I could hear in his voice that this was the first time he'd said any of it out loud to another living person. Somewhere in her, this was the closest she ever got to one. It doesn't excuse a single invoice. It does explain, a little, why she needed the applause so badly she was willing to take it out of a 7-year-old's surgery to get it. My father and I are not fully repaired. We talk more now than we did a year ago, real conversations, not just holiday logistics, but there's a wariness in it still, on both sides, that neither of us quite knows how to put down yet. I'm letting that take whatever time it actually needs. I found Marisol Tan's email address through the hospital directory a few weeks after the dedication and wrote her a long, probably too detailed message just to say thank you again for the pillow and the recliner cushion and every small kindness that was never actually required by her job. She wrote back the same day, "I remember Bo. Tell Maisie he's still tough." I read that line to Maisie at breakfast, and she made me read it twice. Bo stays on Maisie's bed now, permanently. No more photographs, no more foundation appearances anywhere. She's thriving, back in gymnastics, loud at the dinner table, exactly as ordinary and unremarkable as I always wanted her medical file to eventually let her be. Grant and I still do Sunday pancakes together, 3 of us at one table, no hidden ledgers anywhere, just syrup and a kid narrating her own week at full volume. He still makes the same joke every single week about his own pancakes being architecturally unstable, and Maisie still laughs at it every single week like it's brand new, and some Sundays, that's the whole of what I need to know things are actually all right. I think about that database sometimes, how ordinary it looked, how anyone could have opened it, how the only unusual thing I ever did was actually read what was already sitting there in plain view. People imagine justice needs a confrontation, a raised voice, a moment where you finally get to say your piece. Sometimes it just needs you to fill out the same form a stranger would, and then have the discipline to let a system that isn't yours do the rest of the work on its own schedule. The truth doesn't need someone to announce it. It just needs a clock nobody's watching to eventually strike the right hour on its own. Bo sits propped against her pillow most nights now, a little flatter than he used to be, one ear gone slightly gray from washing. He's not a symbol of anything anymore, he's just hers. That's my story. $96,000 raised in my daughter's name, and in the end, all it took to answer it honestly was a public form, a good reporter's ordinary diligence, and a mother who changed absolutely nothing about how she showed up. I still do this job every day, same office, same public database anyone can open. I read every file differently now, if I'm honest, less like case numbers, more like a reminder that somewhere behind each one is a family standing exactly where I stood, hoping the person they love simply hasn't done what the numbers are starting to suggest. I still believe most people haven't. I also no longer believe that hoping is a reason to stop looking. If someone in your life has ever used your hardest season as their own spotlight, take this as your sign. You don't have to perform outrage to be believed. Sometimes doing exactly what you'd tell anyone else to do is the loudest thing in the room. Share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.